You've read the books. Multiple. More than most people in your social circle. The classics, you've done those. The ones recommended by people whose judgment you trust, those too. Some you listened to in the car. Some you actually sat with, underlined, came back to. You know what a Roth conversion ladder is. You understand sequence of returns risk. You have opinions about expense ratios. You have thoughts about the 4% rule and why it might not hold. You have the vocabulary. You have the frameworks. You have the mental models. And your financial life is not where someone who knows all of that should have it. That shouldn't be true, but it is. There is a gap. Not a catastrophe, not even something most people would notice from the outside, but you notice. The distance between what you know and what you've actually done with it, between the plan that exists in your head, thoroughly researched and almost ready, and the plan that exists in your accounts. That gap has been there for a while. You've explained it to yourself in different ways over different years. Here is the explanation nobody puts in the introduction. The reading didn't close the gap. The reading is the gap. Let me be precise about what I'm not saying. This is not an argument for financial ignorance. The people who engage with none of this, who have no mental models, no vocabulary, no framework for how money actually moves, they face a genuinely different and often harder set of problems. You are not that person. You cared enough to learn. You treated this as something worth taking seriously. That instinct is not the problem. What I'm asking you to look at is something more specific. Not whether you read, but what the reading did to the way you make decisions, what it quietly built in the background of every financial choice you approach without you ever choosing to build it. Because something very particular happens when an intelligent person reads seriously about money, something that looks from the inside almost perfectly identical to progress. And the closer you look at it, the more uncomfortable that similarity becomes. Here is what the books told you, collectively, structurally, whether any individual author meant to or not. That there is a right way to do this, that the right way is knowable, and that a person like you, someone who reads carefully, thinks precisely, tolerates complexity, is exactly the kind of person who can find it. That premise is embedded in the entire genre. It's the implicit contract of every personal finance book ever published. Read this, understand this, and you will be equipped to make better decisions than the people who didn't. So you read, you understood, you were equipped. And then something uncomfortable happened, which is that you read another one. Not carelessly, for a real reason. The first one left something unresolved, or it contradicted an assumption you'd been carrying, or your specific situation, your income structure, your tax position, your actual timeline, didn't quite fit the scenarios the author was imagining. So you went looking for the framework that would account for your particular case. And you found one. And it was useful. And it was also, in certain places, in quiet tension with what came before. One said the emergency fund is sacred, full stop. Another ran the numbers for stable incomes and showed that being too conservative there costs you compounding years you can't recover. One made the case for simplicity. Another introduced strategies that implied simplicity was leaving money behind. Every book was well-reasoned. Every author had evidence and logic and genuine expertise, and every single one of them raised, quietly, as a side effect, the bar for what you would need to understand before you could feel confident enough to move. Nobody told you that was happening. None of them had a chapter on it. The mechanism is this. Every intelligent person has an internal threshold, a standard of certainty they require before a decision feels ready to execute. This threshold is not fixed. It moves. And the thing that moves it, reliably, is learning. When you know very little, the threshold is low. You act on instinct, or you copy someone else, or you make a rough call with limited information. Nobody's proud of it, but it moves. When you learn a little, the threshold rises.
but your capability rises with it. At this stage, knowledge and action stay synchronized. The reading produces clarity. The clarity produces a decision. This is the stage every personal finance book assumes you're in. This is the loop they were designed for. But there is a point, and nobody marks it, nobody warns you when you're crossing it, where continued reading stops doing that. Where each new framework you absorb doesn't add to your conviction, it adds to your conditions, the list of things that would need to be true before the decision feels safe to make. And at that point, something inverts, quietly, without ceremony. The reading is no longer preparing you to act. The reading is what you do instead of acting. And here is the part that makes this so hard to see. It still feels exactly like preparation. It has all the same sensations: engagement, growth, the feeling of a responsible person taking something seriously. The only thing it doesn't have is the thing that actual decisions require: commitment to something imperfect, under uncertainty, that cannot be undone. A decision can be wrong. A book can only be interesting. The reading felt like getting ready. It was getting comfortable. This is the loop. A financial question surfaces. The question sends you looking for the right framework. The framework produces partial clarity and new complexity in equal measure. The new complexity identifies something you hadn't accounted for. That gap justifies another book, another podcast, another deep read, and the original question, the one that started all of this, is still sitting there, open, still waiting for the level of understanding that would finally make it feel safe to answer. That level doesn't arrive, not because you haven't read enough, because the threshold and the knowledge are traveling together. Every time you get closer, the bar moves, not dramatically, just enough. The runner and the finish line, always exactly the same distance apart. And the cruelest part of this loop is that at every single stage, the case for reading more is completely defensible. There is always something you genuinely haven't considered. An intelligent person can find real intellectual justification for indefinite information gathering, because there is always truly more to know. The loop provides its own cover. You don't have a knowledge problem. You have a decision problem disguised as intelligence. This is the territory smart money sabotage is built to name, the ways that the most reasonable, most defensible behavior quietly becomes the thing standing between a capable person and the financial life they have spent years studying how to build. This doesn't live in dramatic moments. It lives in the ordinary texture of a week, in the decisions that keep appearing on tomorrow's list and never quite making it to today's. There's the person who has been meaning to open the brokerage account for 16 months. The money is sitting in a savings account, losing ground to inflation. They know this. They have known it for all 16 months. But every time they sit down to do it, something surfaces. First, it was index funds versus target date funds. They read more. By the time that felt resolved, they had encountered something about tax loss harvesting that raised a question about account type. Then it was the broker comparison. Then lump sum versus dollar cost averaging. And they had now read compelling arguments on both sides from people who clearly knew more than they did. Every session was genuinely informative. The account still doesn't exist. The money is still sitting there, losing ground, every day. There's the person who has known for 2 years they need a financial advisor. They've also read enough to know that most are commission conflicted, that fee only is the standard to seek, that you have to ask the right questions to evaluate one properly. So they researched how to find a good advisor. They have a list of questions. The list is in a notes app on their phone right now. They have never called anyone. The research on how to find the advisor has become a permanent substitute for finding one. There's the person who knows, concretely, specifically, that their 401k allocation is wrong. They've read enough to understand that the defaults are almost always suboptimal, that certain fund expense ratios quietly compound into real money over decades.
that their current mix doesn't match their actual timeline. They have been meaning to log in and fix it. The login is saved. They think about it every quarter when the statement arrives. The allocation is exactly what it was the day they were hired. And then there is this one. You're not stuck because you don't know what to do. You're stuck because you won't accept doing it imperfectly. Someone in their circle, less informed, thinks about this less carefully, does not have the vocabulary for any of the concepts they've spent years absorbing, made a move 4 years ago, imperfectly, without doing nearly enough research, with a framework that had real gaps in it, gaps this person can identify on sight. And that imperfect move has been compounding quietly this entire time. And now the gap between where that person is and where this person is, with all their knowledge, all their reading, all their almost ready, is not small. Sitting with that is a specific kind of uncomfortable. Not jealousy exactly, not self-recrimination exactly. Something slower and stranger than either. The feeling of watching someone run without checking the map and arrive before you. The cost doesn't appear in any single year. That's what lets it sustain itself. The absence of a visible, discrete consequence makes each deferred decision feel like a small thing, a few more weeks, once this last piece is clear. But financial decisions are unusual in how their costs and benefits travel through time. The difference between acting at 32 and acting at 35 is not 3 years of outcomes. In most realistic scenarios, it is a decade or more of compounding, accumulating silently, asymmetrically, in a direction that only becomes fully visible in retrospect. The person who invested imperfectly at 32 is, in nearly every realistic scenario, in a substantially different position at 50 than the person who waited for the right framework and started at 35. The math is not subtle, and it has nothing to do with how much either person knew. It is entirely a function of when the money started moving. The gap in your accounts isn't from bad decisions. It's from the decision you keep not making. There is a subtler cost that doesn't appear in any projection. Over years of sustained research without proportional action, something shifts in how a person holds themselves around their own financial life. The gap between what they know and what they've done, and they are always aware of this gap, even if they don't name it, starts to have a weight. Not dramatic, but an intelligent person who has deferred year after year the thing they fully understood they should be doing accumulates something that doesn't present as shame. It presents as more research, more refinement, more almost ready, all of which continues to feel like progress, none of which moves the number. A tool like Monarch Money, which maps your actual decisions against your intentions in real time, which shows your net worth trajectory not as a projection, but as what actually happened, can make this gap suddenly starkly visible in a way that mental models cannot. The dashboard doesn't care what you've read. It reflects only what you've done. Some people find that confronting. That confrontation is more honest than any book about what to do next. And there is a relational cost that almost never gets named directly. A partner who has watched the research happen for 3 years and cannot explain why nothing has moved, who doesn't know how to say, "I think you are living inside the learning instead of past it," who stops raising it because the answer is always some version of, "We're still working through the right approach," who begins to treat the finances as one person's territory, not because they were shut out, but because the depth of the knowledge base has made the space feel inaccessible to anyone who hasn't read as much. Knowledge that accumulates without action can quietly become a room only one person knows to enter.
Think of the financial decision that has been waiting the longest, not the one held up by something genuinely external, the one that is waiting because it doesn't feel quite decided yet.
because something hasn't fully clarified. Now ask yourself honestly, what information specifically would close it? Can you name it? Is there a book that would do it? A number? A conversation? Or is the honest answer that you're not sure, that the threshold is real, but its requirements keep arriving just ahead of you? Notice that. You have more financial knowledge than most people in your life. You also have fewer financial actions completed than that knowledge would suggest. You have, at least once, started a financial move, an account, a transfer, a reallocation, and paused it midway because something you read made you uncertain about whether it was the right approach. When a financial decision has actually happened for you in the last few years, it was rarely because you reached certainty. It was because something external forced it. A deadline, a tax event, a life change. The decision was made in an hour, under pressure, using information you had already held for months. There is at least one resource you bought because it felt like the piece that would finally make things clear. You have not finished it. When someone who knows less than you makes an imperfect financial move and it works, you feel something you don't examine too closely. The next step in your financial life is not unclear to you. You know what it is. You have known for a while. It is still the next step. If you're being honest, the primary evidence that you take your finances seriously is how much you've read about them. The evidence from money actually moved is thinner, and you know that. None of this describes someone irresponsible. It describes someone whose intelligence became the instrument they trust most, and who therefore cannot act until that instrument produces certainty. The instrument was never designed to produce certainty. It was always going to leave you one book short.
What changes when you can see the reading not as the path toward financial action, but as, in specific cases, the structure that has been replacing it? Not all reading. Some of what you've absorbed has done real work. It has genuinely changed conclusions you would have reached otherwise, prevented real mistakes, introduced variables you would not have found. The question is whether a particular act of consumption is moving you toward a decision or raising the bar for what the decision requires. From the inside, these feel almost identical. Both involve engagement. Both carry the sensation of getting closer. The difference only becomes visible when you return, after the book, after the podcast, after the deep read, to the question that was waiting when you started, whether that question feels more answerable now or just more conditional. An intelligent person can find an infinite supply of legitimately interesting financial information. The internet is not going to run out of it. And the genuinely useful material looks exactly like the material as deferral. Same format, same quality of reasoning, same sensation of clarity while consuming it. The only pressure that distinguishes them is this: what does this do to the decision that was already waiting? Does the reading move that decision closer, or does it install one more condition it has to meet before it's allowed to happen? Once you can hold that question, not as self-criticism, but as a real question you return to, the reading changes. It doesn't stop, but it has to answer to something now. It has to justify itself against the decision it was supposedly preparing you for. That pressure is small, and it is the only thing that actually changes the loop. The books were not a mistake. The desire to understand before acting, to not commit to something irreversible in ignorance, that instinct is real, and it came from somewhere worth respecting. It has served you. In many areas of your life, it continues to serve you well. What this video is leaving you with is a deliberately small question, almost uncomfortably small given how much thought you've put into all of this. What would it look like to treat one decision, just one, as already informed enough? Not perfectly informed, not optimally positioned, not resolved in every dimension you can imagine, just good enough, ready enough, known enough to move. Because the version of you that acts imperfectly this month with what you already have is ahead.
In 10 years, that version is measurably, concretely, mathematically ahead of the version that reads one more book first. And the part of you that already knows this, that has, if you're honest, known it for some time, that part is not waiting for more information. It's waiting for permission to stop waiting. You don't need another book for that either.